Laurel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here and have this conversation. At the time of this recording, we're at the beginning of a new year. In my sense, I don't know what you think, is this is going to be a year of like an avalanche of remote transition and distributed teams.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, just at the beginning of 2019, I wrote a Forbes article that was kind of, at the time, it felt a bit ballsy, right? Like, remote work is coming up and this is a big deal and there might be a larger level to this. And I felt like my voice was very lone at that time. And it felt, like I said, pretty gutsy to be saying that message. It was only a year ago. And all of a sudden, like, everybody's talking about it. We're seeing remote work becoming so much more transparent. There's much, much more activity and engagement. So yes, I think that 2020 is going to be massive.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's cool. I know you're a Forbes contributor, and so you have all of that on record, so you can kind of point back and see, I told you so, right? It's
Yeah, I
proven.
told you so. Yeah. Makes you feel good, validating.
Right. That's great. Well, Laurel, people have heard a little bit about you in the intro and kind of what you're up to now, but why don't you go ahead and give us kind of the backstory, kind of the superhero origin story of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I mean, like any origin story at the time, it doesn't seem very glamorous or very easy, but it always ends up in a good place. So I started as a remote worker when I took my own team remote 13 years ago. I was an operations manager, and we were in a critical stage of growth that saving on real estate costs would really make or break our budget. And so we decided to just test that out for a couple of months, see what would happen. And it was never intended to be permanent because at that time, remote work was not cool. There was no way that you would ever admit that you did not have an office space, because if you did, you are not a credible and legitimate company. And so we played it off as good customer service. We'd say, "Oh, well, we'll come to you," or "Let's meet at the site," or something like that. And so our customers loved us, but we thought we can get away with it for just a couple of months. But the employee retention and satisfaction and cost savings were so massive that I never went back. And then just on the side, obviously organically at first, and then more formally as a consultant, started advising other companies. What does this look like, especially in small businesses and mid-sized businesses? Again, it feels ancient now, but it's like, what is the cloud, and how can you,
Right.
collaborate with people without having to email everything back and forth? And this was the era of video calls coming to fruition. So yeah, it was just teaching people how to use those tools and communicate in a virtual workplace as opposed to a physical workplace. That evolved until the point that I was a COO of a company of about 500, and we were fully distributed. And that's really where we started seeing some organizational development keys and factors, that it was like, wow, there's a very clear right way to do this and a very clear wrong way to do this. And
Yeah.
I want to make sure that my company, as well as other companies, have access to the right way. And then that's where distribute consulting came from, is conducting all of that research with every single distributed company that I could get my hand on, and saying, all right, what are our patterns of success? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you not doing? And laying those all on top of each other, and then conducting academic research, and just really identifying what is
Mhm.
this thing, and how is this influencing our businesses and our economy and our personal lives, and just thinking at this at a deeper level. So yeah, it's been a
Yeah.
wild ride, one that I never expected, but it's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So I want to make sure I heard you right. So that 500 person company where you're the COO, that was fully distributed?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really critical part of your journey, right? Is when you see something done at that level of scale, uh,
Mhm.
all of the problems and all the opportunities are amplified. So maybe you could just walk through, it doesn't have to be super specific, but what are some of the things that you learned from, right, doing something at such a large scale? Like, what did it reveal to you? Uh,
Yeah. So I had climbed up to that position, and so it was a relatively new position, and that's where unfortunately I saw the dark side of remote work. I had grown very organically in the other businesses, and in my consulting I had always seen the positive side, like, yeah, this is possible and it's easy and it's not that hard, not that different. And but then when I got into that company, that's where I saw going wrong. And so culture was a really big part of that. Management mindset was a really big part of it. Not having a trust-based, results-based culture, or pushing the results-based culture too far and just demanding too many results. And so it's all of the same basic principles that we hear about, like on your podcast and in the blogs that we read and stuff like that, and articles and guides. There's so many resources now that have come from that 2019 that we talked about. So it's all of the same principles that we see, but it's being done in a wrong way. And it was creating an intensely unhealthy culture. The turnover rate was literally 98%.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, it was just a revolving door. It was ridiculous. And it was just, I was vomiting before stand-ups because I was so nervous. People that were quitting and getting fired were having to go straight to therapy. I mean, it was intense.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a movie. It sounds ridiculous, but it was true. And so that really, when I saw that happening, organizational development has always been my sweet spot in operations. I love that as a hobby. And so that's really got my mind turning of, okay, what's happening here? And obviously we can build good distributed teams, but also we can build very bad distributed teams. And I need to understand exactly what that difference is so that we can avoid. This was also the era of IBM and Yahoo retracting their policies. Excuse me. So that's when I was like, okay, what are these people doing and what are these people doing and what's the difference and how can we make sure that there's a very clear fence in between the two?
So I got to ask you, I mean, just on a personal level too, just such a visceral negative experience with remote work done at that level of scale. What was so attractive to you about seeing this done right that it was worth continuing? Because I mean, it had to be something compelling to keep pushing down that road.
Right. So I'm a very spiteful person and I'm operations, right? Like that's my mind is let's take a vision and make it happen and figure out how to make it happen. And so my job description has always been just trial and error and change management and effective change management. So I've never really been deterred by a negative experience. That just kind of gets my motivation up and running even more of like, well, I know that there's a right way. We just have to work harder to find the right way. And so that's exactly where Distribute came from is, okay, now that I know that there's a very clear wrong way, that means that there's some intentional decisions that are being made along the way that with something as new and evolving as remote work, I mean, it's been around since the 70s, right? So it's not new, but full distribution is a relatively new concept. And just remote work being so common in hybrid teams is also new. So as we venture into this uncharted territory, you don't know what you don't know. And so as companies are making this change organically, there's a really high risk factor that they might end up like Yahoo, they might end up like Envision, you just don't know. And so that's my job as operations, right, is want to think ahead. So my brain naturally went there, that I was like, I want to skip 10 steps ahead and look back so that I can identify exactly what those pitfalls were so that I can navigate people to avoid them so that they don't have that experience like I did.
I love it. You know, sometimes the negative motivation can be the best one, right? Just like, how do I internalize this experience I had and make sure nobody else has it? It's awesome. I love it. So I know, I know it's much different beast when you're starting something that's natively distributed from the get-go, from the outset. But I know in the work that you do, as a consultant, you're working with larger organization. You work with the government, which I definitely want to get into. But just walk us through, an existing organization that might have a remote program but is not completely distributed. What qualifies like a great management team for somebody who you feel like is ready to make that transition either to a hybrid model or to a completely distributed model, who's kind of already starting from a co-located type of a model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I always laugh a little bit when companies come to me and they're like, we're thinking about remote work. And I'm like, cool, it's already happening. Like, let's just cut the crap here for a second. Right. Like, are you sincerely walking up to every single person that you collaborate with and do business with? No, we're all using digital tools. We're all emailing somebody, whether they live 6 continents away or 6 cubicles away. Like, we're using digital tools and virtual collaboration anyway. So it's already happening. Location is becoming irrelevant in general. So what we're doing as remote work advocates and consultants is just saying, let's strategize that and leverage that. So you're doing this in a better way, that it's not just happening to you, but you're capitalizing on it as a business. So that's what we do, is we help them first identify that remote work is already part of their organization. But what's probably not happening is that remote work is not happening legally. So remote work has been happening very, very organically. So it's one individual here and there that, had a situation come up, right? Paternity leave, or the spouse moved away, or something like that. Like, a life event happened that they said, I'd like to keep my job, but blank. And so they said, yeah, remote work policy, flexibility, great. Yes, you have permission. Now, that's been great, especially as an evolution to get us to the point where we are. However, what companies are not realizing is that's actually fueling discrimination. When you're giving a flexibility benefit to one person and not to another, only based on a personal criteria, that's discrimination. And so we're seeing really large levels of like, people that are staying in the office get higher promotion rates and greater accessibility to opportunities and education because they're in the office, because the workplace and employee experience has not been updated to be standardized for the on-site and off-site workers. So that's usually what we're doing, as opposed to implementing a new policy. We're just making sure that it's happening well. So we're making sure that their remote work policy exists, which usually it doesn't, and it's sound and it's compliant with the employment contracts, and outlining the expectations for working off-site so that there's not a higher firing rate, which is also a problem because those communications aren't articulated. Like, yes, I need you to be accessible between the hours of 3 and 6 Eastern time. People just think, oh, I'm working remotely, and that means different things to different people. So yeah, so we get those policies and expectations in place. We help them standardize their communication channels so it's an equal employee experience and workplace. And then after that, it's management mindset. So the adoption of remote work is typically blocked at the mid-management level, and understandably so, right? These are the people that are responsible for boots on the ground implementation, and they are the most ingrained in that productivity supervision mentality that's sensory based, right? I can hear phones ringing, I can see people in the office, and to shift that away from that sensory experience to, I can never see somebody working, like, that's a big shift. That's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. So that's the third part that we do, is really get leadership training in place to help them understand what management and support and collaboration and dynamics look like virtually as opposed to physically. It's not a big shift. It's not like we have to, completely give them a whole new college education all over again. It's not a big shift, but it is a very intentional shift. Again, you don't know what you don't know. And so it can take years to learn how to read nonverbal communication in a virtual environment. But if you have somebody come in for a workshop in a day and you can learn it in one day and be able to implement it after that, then it's a very seamless transition.
Totally. And how much, in your work, I imagine you mentioned results-based environments before, like how much of a transition do companies need to go through to kind of reevaluate how they measure productivity and effectiveness of an employee? Or is that just something that kind of follows suit with getting all the policies in place?
That is the pattern that we see the most often utilized in distributed teams, and especially in remote first teams, is ROWE, the resulting only work environment. And it's a shift in productivity tracking that is less based on supervision, like we talked about, and more on a trust-based cycle with results at the end. So trust rewarded by results. And this is classic work, right? Remote work is just work. So we've been hearing about this in business books forever, right? Like measure accomplishment, not activity. So this is not anything new or revolutionary, but in virtual environments, it's just a much more saturated and sped up process than it has been in the corporate business world. So that's where we see the most success, or I should just say it's common. However, it's completely possible and also very common to still be measuring time, still be measuring deliverables, still be measuring, brainstorming activity or whatever, measuring results in a lot of different ways. It's just a matter of adapting it correctly so that it's non-discriminatory and so that it's happening effectively. Specifically time, like, somebody might be clocking in, but are they playing, Minecraft, or are they actually working? Like, we don't know. But we didn't know that in the office either. This was the era of Facebook and so like we know that results is just the best way to measure work. We just had a big spotlight shown on that in remote work because people were more worried about not being able to supervise work with a sensory experience.
Well, it sounds like you have some maybe more sensible clients. I got to share this one little war story where I heard of a manager or a founder who wanted to transition or allow for some remote work. So already probably discriminating because there's no policy in place. But then his requirement was that you had to keep a webcam on the whole day so that he or she could basically check in at any time to see if you're at your desk or what you might be doing at your desk, and also share your screen. So it's like this big brother approach to just like monitoring you in the most invasive way possible.
It's so true. It's, in an ideal world, yes, it's like the trust base. However, that's exactly why we exist as consultants, is because most of the time that's happening. And again, this comes to the organic transition conversation, right? If you're just converting the process in your mind and you say, well, I was supervising them visually and, monitoring their activity in the office, that's a natural next step. And you just don't really take the time to step back and say, that's an incredible invasion of privacy. And that is like, what is that communicating to my workforce about how much I value and trust them? Like, that's not doing things well. So, I mean, it's an organic change. So that is why it's important to work with a consultant that can say, hey, that's actually a red flag. But in some circumstances, I also need to defend that it is a really great idea in other circumstances. For example, the healthcare industry, they utilize that approach for webcams on all the time because that's how they enforce HIPAA compliance. And so when you have a webcam on, it's like, this allows an entire industry that is currently constrained by industry regulations, that allows millions of people to now work remotely if they're willing to have a webcam on them. And in that circumstance, I'm like, sure, like, put a webcam on me.
It's context specific though, for sure, right? Yeah, it means two very different things. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's how it's delivered too. Like, when you are forced to answer the question as a manager, why do we have webcams on? If you can answer it and say, because we want to allow you to work remotely and this is how we enforce industry regulations, that's a very different answer than, well, I just need to make sure that you're working all day. And it's like, well, yeah, so that's
no trust.
It's a conversation starter, shall we say.
Sure. Well, so I know where you really specialize and where your team specializes is being, the trainer of the trainer. And you mentioned middle management is who really feels the pain point the most, or in the transition, or I guess the disturbance. What are some of the more tactical pieces of advice that you're giving middle managers around communicating expectations, or like you mentioned reading body language or reading nonverbal communication, but what are some of the other things that come up most frequently as you're training those people to, lead and manage in a different way that maybe they're not used to?
Yeah. So if you, any remote work content that you read or hear or see anywhere out there usually boils down to one of three categories, and that's trust, culture, and communication. And frankly, they're all kind of the same thing as well. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's what it boils down to is, are you willing to make that shift in the dynamics of your team between how you collaborated in an office versus how you will collaborate on in a virtual environment? And usually that is, communication is the visible symptom of what's happening underneath. So if your communication is, if it's more transparent, it's more frequent, it's more structured, it's more empathetic, then it shows that those other management mindsets, such as more trust and less supervision, more employee empowerment, more self-management happening at the workforce level, that all of those things are happening if that communication is always flowing. So that's what we really try to focus on the most. And when we are suggesting consulting services and training workshops, every single one of them includes communication, because it at first feels quite different and a little bit awkward to be so proactive in your communication. We're coming from workspaces where it's like, just figure it out, FIO on your own. And that's a great skill, but we were also taught to shut up and not express when we have a need. And guess what that's turning into? An isolation crisis within remote workers. They're removed from their workforce, and all of a sudden they have been trained not to say anything, and so therefore they're just stuck. And so we're really trying to tell people, much more transparent, much more frequent, much more vulnerable in your communication. It feels awkward at first, but this is the new visibility. This is how you come to the office early and have a stronger voice at the table, is just being more proactive in voicing your needs and activity.
That's really good. That's rich. I wanted to actually build on that point though and ask you, tell me a little bit about the isolation crisis, because I know you've observed data. I know you've written in depth about this. So what is the trend that you're seeing there on the negative side, just in terms of isolation?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that remote work is not necessarily the problem, but again, just like the management mindset, it's a petri dish, right? This is just a hyper saturated environment where we're seeing the problem come to fruition much quicker. The bigger problem is twofold. Number one is that the social isolation problem, it's a societal problem. This is not a professional problem. This is the fact that our society, our people are losing the ability to make human connections. And so when they are taken away from the office environment, where traditionally, this is what we've become dependent on, is only making friends and getting to know people in this environment, because it's where we spend so much of the majority of our time. So when we are taken out of that forced environment and we're left to our own devices, it's like, well, what do I do? So there's been really embarrassing and awkward times that I've given presentations, and the presentation has taken an awkward turn of, like, instead of talking about, remote work dynamics, we're talking about, well, how do you make friends? Actually you can talk to people at the grocery store, or you can start a social hobby, or things like that. And we're just really have to go back to that fundamental level. However, at the larger level, especially in the corporate workplace, what we're identifying as the problem is that people are not necessarily missing the social or having a social isolation problem. They're having an informational isolation problem. And this is because the companies are not updating their infrastructures accurately to create a standardized employee experience for on-site and off-site workers. So people aren't missing sitting next to somebody. They're missing having access to somebody. Hey, I have a question, or I just made a great sale, and you celebrate together, or hey, what do you think about this? We need to brainstorm some ideas. That accessibility to team members is missing. And so if you're not creating the correct communication channels, the correct rituals and engagement activities for your workers, yes, they are going to be cut off from the resources that they need in order to do their job well. And more importantly, they're going to be cut off from the resources that they need for their career to develop. So this is why we see such high career stagnancy rates in freelancers, is because, again, they just don't know that they're supposed to be, going to educational conferences once a year and having performance reviews multiple times a year and all of this stuff. And so that isolation is really locking people in their productivity on a micro level, but then on a macro level, their career development, and as a result, our economic development.
Wow. Yeah, I really honestly haven't heard anybody articulate it in that level of depth, because it's usually a focus on the relational, right? The very explicit,
Yeah,
oh, you're in your home office, you never see anybody anymore. Boohoo.
right.
And that is a problem, right? You don't want to understate the relational aspect, but there are these other, I guess, outgrowths of isolation that impact you financially or professionally that, yeah, you got to be
Exactly.
aware
And
of.
so many people fall into the trap of like, well, introverts are good at remote work, extroverts are not because they need that social
Right.
dynamic. Not even a little bit is that relevant. Like, not even close. There
Yeah.
are times that there are days that my days are so socially saturated that it's exhausting. And then there's other days that are not like, it's about how you're working, who you're working with, how you're collaborating with people, how you're allowing yourself to engage with people, and it has nothing to do with your environment.
Right. Wow. That's good. Well said. That'll tweet.
Thank you. Soundbite.
So I've got to ask you, because I know you're probably one of the only ones in the world who's working with government organizations and helping them make this transition. So to the degree that you're able and won't be thrown into some dark site somewhere, tell us a little bit more just about the work that you do with government, and kind of what challenges are unique to, I guess, to that space.
Right. So this is exactly what every organization, every person should know, is that remote work is not one size fits all. It's not, I am a remote worker or I am not a remote worker. The goal of all of us advocates of remote work is that remote work just becomes work, that we want to work ourselves out of a job. We want the label to be completely removed. So I like to think more of remote work as a tool, as a strategy. And that's exactly what I do with governments and with organizations, is we say, all right, we have a problem that we need a solution for. How can we leverage virtual workforces to solve that problem? And so at the organization level, sometimes that's like we have a talent acquisition funnel that is sticky and not optimized. Sometimes it's our real estate costs are too high or whatever, and we leverage that. But then on the government level, we just do the same thing at a higher scale. So we're connecting employees with employers. So the most poignant and progressive conversation is that of economic development. That previously, where there are isolated workforces, like rural towns in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, where factories have closed down,
Yeah.
or they're just in the West, where there's just a lot of space and you're 5 hours between towns.
Yeah.
So where those workforces previously have been very, very limited and capped in their ability to grow, now we can bring business to them, we can bring jobs to them, we can bring industries to them at almost no expense. As long as they have a broadband connection, we can make that happen. And all of a sudden, the entire economic development cycle that traditionally has been depended on is now reversed and sped up and almost free. And so we're using this with refugees, we're using this with rural and urban, like to alleviate urbanization. We're doing this to increase unemployment rates, decrease unemployment rates. So we're really trying to do that at a multiple level. And then obviously that has incredible ripple effects. So we see environmental sustainability being impacted, because obviously people aren't driving, they're not producing as much waste. There's less carbon emissions from the large office buildings, et cetera. There's gender equality and diversity and inclusion is a whole nother topic that we could talk about another day, but
Yeah.
we're seeing massive, massive progress there. So yeah, there's all of these ripple effects that happen when we start to strategize and say, all right, how can we take this newfound flexibility and just enhance people's lives and businesses with it, and the life of an individual, the life of a company, or the life of an entire community.
It's fascinating. I guess one question I would have for you is, how are you seeing some of your work and some of these conversations among other advocates? How is that affecting policy? And just to give you an example, I know in Massachusetts recently, Governor Baker rolled out some sort of an incentive, or he proposed some sort of an incentive for business owners to promote remote work arrangements in their companies. And the main pain point, or at least the political talking point, was to alleviate the traffic problem that we have in the city around commuting hours. But what are some of the other ways that you're seeing movement, I guess, on the policy side of things?
Yeah, those are very commonly our clients are exactly those state and country governments that are brainstorming how can we do this, and we jump in and help them with that strategy process and also the implementation and training. So yeah, so the state of Utah is a great example. That was one of my first government clients, and we did this from start to finish. So that we started an education program. This is called the Rural Online Initiative, and we started the education program that would allow rural residents to go from never hearing about remote work all the way to getting a remote job start to finish, getting some SHRM approved certification in there from Workplaceless. And it was awesome. And that was seeing so much success that the other departments of the Governor's Office of Economic Development were impacted as well. So these incentives were also impacted. So we tightened that incentive up. So what we're seeing is any number of policies can be generated to leverage this. And that's kind of our job at Distribute, is that we say, well, it's not one size fits all. You don't need to do exactly what Tulsa did or what Utah did or what Boston did. You can do something that's uniquely beneficial for your city. What is that? What does that look like? And we help them through that process. So it's important to know that it's not one size fits all, but as a whole, in general, what we're seeing as a trend is that yes, policies are becoming much more aware that there is this hidden economy bubbling underneath the traditional corporate world. There's, the gig economy comprises over 50% of the workforce in the United States. Like, that's massive. How have we been ignoring this all this time? And why
When did
is
that
there
happen?
not?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, why is there not a greater infrastructure of benefits to support this type of worker? So yeah, there's just more attention coming to it. And again, this kind of circles back to the organization problem that some governments are saying, oh, that we didn't know that this existed. They're becoming very reactive, and they're trying to draw up laws that will stop this. We see this massively on international tourism, right? The tourism laws right now are very constrained when it comes to nomadism and working in different countries. Taxation is another one. So if we say, no, this is actually, if we can catch them early enough and say, no, this is actually a really good thing. Let's do a case for change, or a case study on how much this is helping your economy and how this is impacting and benefiting your communities and your diversification of industries. Then they can make a more informed and educated decision, as opposed to not seeing the whole picture and being very reactive about drawing up a new policy to control this unknown world.
Brilliant. I love it. And I love that there's smart people like yourself who are helping shepherd that conversation, harness the power of the movement rather than getting it squashed. That's great. I guess, I want to be respectful of your time, but one question I have to ask, especially since you're on record as predicting some good momentum in the early 2019 for distributed work. How do you see the future of work? How do looking 10 years in the future, even 15, 20 years in the future, or whatever timeline you decide, what are some of the changes that you feel like we're going to experience as average, workers in the workplace? What does life look like for maybe the next generation who's going to be coming to the workforce?
Yeah. So I think that the future of work trend that's happening is very, very telling. And I hope that we, as a workforce, have the courage to allow these conversations about artificial intelligence and automation and remote work to be happening and to be evolving, and to let them evolve, because they are so crucial. And the umbrella theme that I see here is that we're allowing the human element to be unleashed and to fulfill its maximized potential. When we can offload repetitive tasks, and when we can offload very controlled and siloed job descriptions that served our economy very, very well in the Industrial Revolution. But now it's time for the next level. So when we can offload that and eliminate those from the workplace, then we allow people to think and work as people, to be creative, to be empowered, to be self-managers, to work more flexibly and autonomously and be more dependent on and trustworthy. That's what I see the future of work becoming. And the conversation will be less and less about remote work, right? Like it won't be where you are or are not working. It's about what we're creating, what we're designing, what problems we're solving, and really allowing ourselves to think critically. And that's what I think we need to develop in order to make that happen. That soft skills in our society are dangerously declining. We're losing our ability to make friends, like we talked about. We're losing our ability to communicate effectively. We're losing our ability to think empathetically and to think critically. But those skills are the skills that are going to become more important in the future of work. And so we need to be able to be humble enough, as well as proactive enough to identify that gap within ourselves and say, we need to turn our weaknesses into strengths so that we can really fulfill the potential of the future of work.
Wow, Laurel, beautifully said. I don't think we need anything more than that. That should be the exclamation point right there. Thank you for taking the time to join me. If people wanted to reach out, what's the best way for people to contact you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I'm the only Laurel Farrer that exists out there, as long as you spell it correctly. So it's easy to find me. You can also come to my website, which is just my name, laurelfarrer.com.
Great. Thanks so much, Laurel.
Thank you.
Take care.